Hello to anybody who's watching. I'm back in my workshop, and this time the project I have is a repair project. Now, a friend of mine was delivered a coffee table made mostly of oak by the look of it, but the box in which it came had been clearly dropped from a great height, and all the components of the table inside were shattered. When they unpacked the box, of course, they discovered it and reported it back to the supplier, who did the right thing, gave them a replacement box and didn't want the shattered coffee table back. So it was given to me in expectation that maybe I could repair the table, but as you'll see, there are quite some extensive repairs to be done. So this is the kind of damage we're talking about. The undercarriage for the table, which supports the four legs, has completely snapped. Broken in half at this end, broken in half at that end. But many of the dowels have either snapped off or been dislodged. And in some cases, the damage is in very visible areas. This corner of the tabletop has been shattered and distorted, and I think that will need a whole new piece. Even here, the main tabletop has been split to an extent, and I don't know how I'm going to get any glue into there. This side piece has been split in 3 places, right across the middle here as well, and on the end here, again, the piece is so distorted and warped that it will probably need a replacement. The drawers as well have been compromised. The dovetails have all dislodged, and with this drawer, the dovetails have been shattered completely. The whole drawer is split at both ends. So it's clear that this was dropped from a great height and will take some considerable repair. I'm going to start with something reasonably straightforward, and that is re-gluing these half-blind dovetails. I was hoping I might be able to resurrect the join where these 2 pieces come together. The dowels are pretty well still available, but this corner is totally compromised. Both here and there it's been squashed and split, and I don't think I'd ever be able to reform that corner accurately without replacing the pieces. So I think I'll take a piece off here and a piece out of there as well. I have got some pieces of silky oak here, which I think will be a reasonable match in grain and colour, and so I'll try to give that a go. Okay, the next on this long list of repairs is to try to put together again these two halves, which have snapped right through of the underside of the table. And that means I also have to do a repair on this end where there's a fairly major split. So I think I'll repair that first before I try to join the two halves together. But that means we need to get rid of all the, take off all the hardware from underneath so that we can get a nice flat surface to work with. I've decided I'll try to fix this end split over here at the same time as the two major splits, and I'm using a couple of biscuits at each end, so they'll be glued and biscuited. Unfortunately, the two ends don't quite meet up, so I've got 1 millimetre or 2 difference in the two ends, but I'll just split the difference between the two and hopefully it'll line up well enough to fix back as the underside of the table. Before I glue and set the biscuits in the main splits, I'm going to try to get as much glue as I can into this split here so that when I clamp for the biscuits it will also be clamping at the same time. It's tricky because I don't want to split it any further, but it's quite difficult to squeeze the glue in where it needs to be. Fortunately, it will only be on the bottom or the underside of the table, so it shouldn't be too obvious. I'm being more liberal than usual with the glue here because this is a major structural joint. When the legs are screwed back into this underside, it'll have to take a lot of force applied to the top of the table. And I may yet reinforce this join with a tension bar across the join as well, just to give it some extra strength. With those joins in the base planed out, I want to now reinforce those joins just with a plate of 5-ply wood here, which really is quite a strong way to do it, plywood being very strong indeed, and that's just a matter of putting half a dozen screws in each side to span the splits. This end piece here is split away, but I think it can be closed up successfully. There are a couple of other small split outs here and here on the old dowel holes, but rather than trying to repair those and squeeze them back together, I think I'll just relocate, set new dowels relocating to new positions so that these won't be relevant. The other problem here is that this centre spine, which holds the drawer slides, has kicked away, and so there's a split running along the bottom there. Now, if I don't reset that, there's a chance that the drawers won't sit properly within their slides and will either be too loose or too sticky on one end. To get this straight, I might need to take off this whole brace piece and put it on the other side. Now comes perhaps the hardest repairs of all. This split through here in the tabletop obviously shows on the top side, but the split is diagonal through the grain, so it makes it very hard to move apart or to get glue into. So what I feel I might have to do is a fairly crude fix where I'll plane down the raised edges and just fill and recolor as best I can, and then rely on the bracing pieces across here to hold it together. On this corner too, again, the split which is coming through here actually goes diagonally through, so it's much wider on the other side. That means I'm going to have to cut off a fair chunk of this corner and replace it with a new piece of wood. The silky oak I used on the side piece, I'm not quite happy with the colour match. So in this case, I think I might just use some pine, which is a bit closer in colour to the actual wood, and then colour it accordingly with some stain, and even if I have to trace in with paint some of and fake the grain. I'm going to make this cut here with my portable circular saw because I need the cut to be truly vertical. I'm using a straight edge here clamped to the tabletop to give me a nice straight cut. So I've cut myself a piece of pine which will be attached to the tabletop, and I'll be using biscuits to put it in place. And even though it's a short piece, I'll be using 2 biscuits because it will need to be quite strong. So I want to get a good attachment all the way through. I've allowed the new corner piece of timber to dry overnight. But there's still quite a bit of work to do on here because it hasn't aligned exactly correctly. There's a slight ridge here which I'll need to plane out. And I've cut it oversize on the end and on the side. And I will use a flush trim router to get the exact size. But in addition, there's a bullnose curve on the ends here, which I'll have to route in again. And on the sides, there's actually a 45-degree bevel running along. So that's going to take a bit of router work and then some colouring work to get it looking like part of the original. It's important that the flush trim router follows the exact line of the tabletop. So I'm going to stick a template to the underside of the table with double-sided tape. I'm using this piece of melamine because it has a true right angle and some smooth edges to ensure an exact fit. Now, because the radius of the circumference of the router, the roundover bit, wasn't exactly the same as the one they've used originally, there's still a little bit of work to do here. My curve is sitting a little bit proud, so I'll have to finish that off with some maybe planing and sandpaper. But at least it's taken out most of the waste. And now I'll need to flip it over so I can run the 45-degree bevel along the underside. So that was reasonably successful. The bevel ties in quite well along this line. I had to stop it just before the corner because the other corners have a stopped bevel as well, so I had to be careful not to overrun. It's not even all the way along, as usual in my ham-fisted way. Nothing is ever perfect, but I hope with a bit of chisel work I can clean it up and it will be okay. So there we are, after a little bit of rasping and sanding on the end, I now have a piece that fits the profile almost exactly, both on the end and on the side. And now it's a matter of colouring it up, hoping I can get a good match. After several experiments with the colour, I've diluted the mixture I made yesterday and decided it was the best tone. So it's now or never. Now that colour looks quite different at the moment, but I'm hoping once I get some grain lines in there that it will start to blend in a little more. So that's looking a little less obvious now. And I'm hoping a final couple of coats of shellac will dull that colour down a little more and just make it blend in that little bit more. Now it's time to reattach the table end that had been snapped off. And it was attached with dowels, but one or two of them snapped and are missing. And I'm going to have to drill a new dowel hole or two into the end here where I've put in the new piece. Now I have to mark the spot for the new dowel hole. I see that they are 10mm dowels, and the new dowels I'm putting in match that. So it'll need to be a 10mm hole, but I'm starting with a drill bit smaller than 10mm to give me a guide before I use the final size. Now we can do a test fit before we do the glue up to see that the dowels all register quite well. We'll give it a test for true verticalness. And that's very good. I'm not going to spread that glue too far because I don't want too much squeeze out on the ends. With the side or the ends and the center support back in place and now attached to the tabletop, it's time to try to fit the bottom section, which will hold the legs, back onto the top. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to use all of the same dowel holes and screw holes because many of them have just been ripped out and are unlikely to fit in smoothly again. So I think what I'll do is keep the little wooden plugs which disguised the dowels and screw holes, put them back in to the underside, and then make new dowel holes to secure the top. Now turning it over, and as these are just the original plugs, dowels that I'm really just using to fill the original holes, and I'll be drilling new dowels. I'll just cut these off with my Japanese flush cut trim saw. Now I'll need to measure for the new dowel holes. So I'll start by using the spike to give me an accurate starting hole. Now we'll do a test fit of all the dowels to make sure they come in at about the right depth. Okay, that looks pretty good. But now, of course, we have to indulge in the very dark arts of making the matching holes on the underside of the table. Now, the internet has all kinds of clever ways to mark the positions of dowel holes. I find myself just a very careful measuring and lining up with a nice sharp pencil seems to work. And now for the moment of truth to see if any of these dowels line up with their holes. Not too bad. I think 5 of the 6 have lined up exactly. So I just need to make an adjustment on one of them. Okay, this time it seems we're in business. All the dowels seem to fit now. Now with all the dowels in the bottom glued and clamped, and the drawers test fitted, we can put on the leg furniture again. And now comes another moment of truth where I put the couple of coats of polyurethane on this corner that I've constructed and disguised with pencils and texture pens to try to make it look like the original grain. I'll spread the lacquer across the join, which unfortunately, the join that is going to show up. But with a bit of luck might just look like a scratch. And I'll put another coat on after a drying and light sand to see if it might blend in even a little more. The final part of this restoration is to fill in some of the small end grain tear outs that had happened when it was broken. So my plan for doing that is to retrieve some of the sawdust from my biscuit cutter dust bag, then mixed what's left with some wood glue to make a paste, which I can then use, hopefully, to fill these smaller holes and which, when they're dry, can be sanded smooth and, if necessary, coloured up with the coloured pens. For some of these larger holes, I'm gluing in some end grain plugs. And then when they're dried, I'll cut them off with a flush cut saw, and hopefully I won't have too much backing and filling to do. After cutting back these plugs, sanding them off and doing a little bit of filling, the holes that were on the ends here have now basically been disguised. And now, with the final touch-up of polyurethane, to the repaired pieces, we should be all done. The most difficult pieces to fix, of course, were this long split here in the tabletop, which still needs a little bit of sanding, and the replacement piece here, where I've had to try and match the grain, but I think they've come up not too badly. And this is the final result. It's not perfect, but I think you'll agree it's in much better condition than when it was given to me.